Simon, it doesn't seem that long ago. It was around this time of the day, news came through to us, and it was bombshell news that Conor Benn, it was being alleged, had failed a drugs test. Thereafter, the fight between Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. was postponed. Since then, it's kind of all gone quiet. We hear the promoter of Conor Benn, Hearn, sometimes speaking to certain boxing broadcast outlets, but it's kind of grinded to a halt in that, where do we go from here? Now, for the first time, Chris Eubank Jr.'s promoter, Kalle Sauerland, has decided to speak out. And he spoke to me just before we came on air this morning. And Kalle started with answering a question from me. I put it to him, okay, reflect on it now. Tell me about the events that led up to the postponement of the fight and your thoughts around it.
Ultimately, we're the aggrieved party. You know, we've done nothing wrong. We've done everything by the book. There was no one to have a dialogue with. There were no hearings held, which could have been done much earlier. You know, I mustn't forget the fight still hasn't been or wasn't called off officially for doping, but in the interest of boxing, which doesn't sit well with me either. Either you make a clear call or you don't make a call. Those are the sort of things that I just don't understand. And, you know, we still haven't had a formal line put out to us. And ultimately, we've done nothing wrong. We're the ones who came out without the fight. Junior, as everyone saw, the nation saw, made the weight, was ready to fight, and you know, obviously his opponent had a positive test, so that's bitter. And luckily enough, I haven't been in any similar situations in the last 20-something years with that sort of a timeline. But I felt that, you know, things could have been handled a lot earlier, one way or the other.
If the failed drugs test, news of it, hadn't been leaked to the Daily Mail, do you believe the fight would still have gone ahead?
No, because I think we were waiting all for a call from the board. You know, whether that would be in the form of a hearing, a ruling, or whatever, that's something really the board needs to answer, because, you know, we were waiting. We reached out to the board immediately and were informed to, you know, basically have a dialogue with their lawyers. They came back with some questions, which we answered, and that was it. You know, and every call we made was rebuffed with, please speak to the lawyers. So from that point of view, I think it was a strange set of timings, but it was something that, you know, ultimately came from the side of the board when they wanted to put that out.
Are you still suing the British Boxing Board of Control?
Suing is maybe the wrong word at this time. You know, we're looking at the whole situation, which isn't in our hands. It's something that we have to see what comes out of the investigation around Benn. We hear as much as you hear, Jim, to be honest, because as the aggrieved party, we don't receive the information. We receive the information often by the media. So it's a frustrating situation, but of course we have our legal team on standby. We have a lot of different scenarios that can come out of this, and you know, like I said, they have an ongoing investigation, and we have to sit still legally, but boxing-wise, we need to move on.
But Kalle, when you found out about Benn's failed drugs test, you told us after seeking independent medical advice, the boxers were prepared to carry on with the fight. Was it not unacceptable, Kalle, to allow the fighters to decide which banned substances, if you like, were okay to fight with? Totally understand that opinion from the outside. Totally understand it. Happy to take it on the chin as well. But if I contract with a boxer and there is no ban on the opponent, in this case, Benn, there was no ban on Benn. So if I pull him out the fight and he doesn't want to be pulled out the fight, he was raring to go, he'd taken the medical advice, received the medical advice, then that's the situation. He wanted to fight on the basis of what we'd been told. You know, that was it. It's contractually, you can't pull the man out of the fight like people think. You know, it's not quite the way it works. Yeah, but Kalle, the fighter obviously wants to fight. Was it not down to you guys, you and Eddie Hearn, to take the responsibility?
100%. But if there's a contract in place and I've got no reason to terminate the contract, that's a contract in place. What reason would I give the boxer for terminating the contract?
Yeah, but surely you had a reason after Benn tested positive for a banned substance.
100%, but a positive test then calls for a ban or a removal of his license or something. And that didn't happen, did it? That's the stark truth from our side. It's not like we had a call and said, Benn's been tested positive, he's banned, the fight's off. That never happened. It hasn't happened until today. In fact, the decision that was made on the Wednesday that was announced was that the fight was not in the interest of boxing. Didn't mention doping, which makes it, from our side, even stranger. You know, if there's a straightforward ban, then it's very simple. The contract is off, the fight is off, and everything else is off, basically.
Kalle, as a blue chip promoter, do you accept that no matter what, the integrity of boxing has been damaged hugely by this?
Boxing has always had its ups and downs. This one, being personally involved in the middle of it, as the aggrieved side, I must add, it's just not nice as someone who has grown up in this world since the day I was born. So I come from a boxing family, and, you know, that's all we know. So it's horrible. How do we answer? We fight fire with fire. We've put out, I think, 3 UK shows, great British title fights. You've got to answer with the best answer we can give as boxing, and that's a great, clean sport. You know, unfortunately, this happens in all sports. The way it was handled was, as I said at the time, and I still say now, I still don't understand, and it's something that will come out in due course. But that's something that, again, we're the aggrieved side here, and we have to move forward in the name of boxing and put on the best shows we possibly can.
That was Kalle Sauerland speaking to me earlier. Kalle, of course, the promoter of Chris Eubank Jr. The man in the other corner was Conor Benn, of course, promoted by Hearn. The fight was postponed under hugely controversial circumstances. And here in talkSPORT, you heard it first when that news broke. Simon, what do you make of Calle's response to a variety of points there? And on the fact that Chris Eubank Jr., we understand, it could well be announced as soon as today, is moving on and is going to be fighting here in England, probably in December, against so far an unnamed opponent.
But he has to, because Conor Benn is seemingly not interested in defending his reputation by dealing with the British Boxing Board of Control. He prefers to republish or not renew his boxing licence. Look, they can dress this how they want. And little pygmies like Frank Smith that works for Hearn can make out that people are causing trouble like you and I by asking questions and saying it's controversial or saying that we're trying to be divisive. Nothing of the sort. We're trying to ascertain how a huge fight like this was sought to be put on by 2 promoters, knowing what they knew. What they told us, we're just holding them to their words. They told us on October the 8th, they heard of these failed drug tests was September the 23rd. But that wasn't true, was it? Can't possibly have been true, because he was tested in July, so they knew in August. And I would suspect, and they're now trying to shift the blame for decisions that they wanted to make. If this was a $100,000 fight, this would have been called off. Because it's an £8 million fight, they were seeking to find a mechanism to keep it on.
There's a lot of deflection to the board, isn't there?
Total deflection to the board. I would, if I was surmising what happened, and this is supposition on my part, because of the determination of a drug test via VADA isn't a determinable event in terms of there's no sanctioning position, there's no hearing position. The outcomes will be the same. And if you look back at these promoters, they'll both have spoken about VADA and how conclusive VADA tests are. So if a VADA test produces an outcome, you can believe that UCAD tests will produce the same outcome. It's then the process is how do you sanction it and how do you deal with a hearing. And I would wager you that the promoters were trying to find a mechanism to ensure that the British Boxing Board of Control couldn't come down and sanction this fight, because ultimately this was a VADA test rather than a UCAD test. And so a technicality was being argued for a significant period of time until perhaps a second test came back with another failure, and perhaps still leverage and pressure was being deployed to certain people. And ultimately that pressure didn't result in an outcome that the promoters might have wanted. And it's beyond ridiculous for Kalle or anybody, and he is on the victim side of the argument. But notwithstanding that, it is beyond ridiculous to suggest that the fighters will determine, like the question you asked, we've asked previously, which banned substance they're prepared to allow an opponent to have so they'll fight them. It's ridiculous. Now, he does have a point, to some extent, was, well, how do I pull Chris Eubank out of a fight when effectively the contract is tied into a UCAD testing regime? It's a VADA test. Now, I think there's enough juice in that conversation, to use probably a slightly unfortunate expression given the subject matter we're talking about, but I think there's enough in that to be able to turn around and say, this is a frustrated contract. I'm aware of a drugs test that's failed. I'm aware that this fight is being sanctioned under a contract which refers to a UCAD testing regime. But we can easily submit those tests to UCAD, and UCAD then put us through the scenario. It's what they're seeking to do is distance themselves from any meaningful questions. They're seeking to distance themselves from anybody that has the balls to go, but what about this? But what about this? What they'd rather do is say, actually, you're being divisive. You don't know anything about boxing. You've got no businesses that you're successful in anymore, or your hair's blonde, or we think you're a troublemaker. That's what they're preferring to do. Now, Kalle, in fairness to him, has come on and answered these questions. But if you actually stop and distill it and say, what are we being told? We're being told undeniably that two promoters wanted to put a fight on, knowing that a series of drug tests have been failed, and they wanted to find a way to put it on, and they had no intention of taking it off.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.